Bradley Foster's fingers closed around Olivia Sinclair's wrist and pulled, demanding in front of 400 of the city's wealthiest guests that she accept his invitation. She had already said no 3 times. But the young CEO was tired of being chased for her fortune. Her name the empire behind her smile, and not one guest at the charity gala dared move against the arrogant billionaire. Then a figure in a faded maintenance uniform stepped from the edge of the crowd. Grant Walker, a poor single father who wanted nothing from her, crossed the marble floor and met Foster's eyes. She already said no. The room turned to stone. Minutes later, that quiet defense would nearly cost him everything. The Sinclair Horizon Charity Gala filled the grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel with light, and Olivia Sinclair stood at the center of it. To the 400 guests, she was the founder who had built a company from a single office into an empire in less than a decade. To herself, she was simply tired. She had learned long ago to read a room the way other people read a book. A lingering glance, the exact angle at which a man held his drink as he approached her, and she knew within seconds what he wanted before he did. It was a gift that had made her rich and left her lonely. Every compliment at the gala came attached to a proposal, and she had stopped expecting anything else. Grant Walker moved along the far wall with a tool bag over his shoulder, and no interest in the crowd at all. The hotel had called him in that evening to check a flickering panel in the service corridor, and he preferred the quiet work to the noise of the party. His maintenance uniform was clean, but faded from too many washes. After his marriage collapsed and rearranged the life he thought he would have, he had chosen something smaller and steadier, built on principle rather than ambition. He fixed what was broken, kept his word, and asked for little. The men in tuxedos at the center of the room belonged to a world he had left on purpose, and he felt no envy watching them from its edge. Bradley Foster belonged to that center and made certain everyone knew it. One of the largest investors circling Sinclair Horizon, he had inherited a fortune and spent his life confusing money with worth. He had been watching Olivia all night with the patience of a man who had never been told no in a way that stuck. To him, her refusals were not rejection, but a negotiation he had simply not finished winning. He crossed to her as the orchestra softened, a glass of champagne in his hand, and an audience forming without meaning to. "You keep avoiding me," he said, smiling in a way that did not reach his eyes. "One dinner, Olivia. People are starting to wonder why the great Miss Sinclair is so afraid of a simple invitation." His voice carried farther than a private remark should, and she understood he meant it to. "I've given you my answer 3 times, Bradley," she said, keeping her tone even. "It hasn't changed, and it won't. Enjoy the evening." She turned to go the practiced exit of a woman who had ended 1,000 conversations exactly like it. She expected him to let her leave because men like Bradley always eventually did. He did not. His fingers closed around her wrist and pulled hard enough to turn her back toward him, hard enough that her heel slipped on the marble. "Don't walk away from me," he said, and the smile was gone. The nearest guests fell quiet, and the quiet spread outward like a crack across ice until a wide ring of people stood watching, and none of them said a word. Olivia felt the grip and the weight of 400 stares, and something in her went cold and still. She had faced hostile boardrooms and predatory partners, but she had never been physically held in front of a crowd that chose to do nothing. She saw the calculation move across every familiar face. The investors who owed Bradley favors the executives who feared his money, the reporters already deciding how to frame it. Not one of them stepped forward, and she was alone in a room of 400 people. Grant heard the change before he understood it. The particular hush of a crowd watching something wrong has a texture, and he had felt it once or twice in his life. He set down his tool bag and looked toward the center of the room, and he saw a man twice the width of the woman beside him, gripping her wrist, while she tried with as much dignity as she could hold to pull free. He saw the ring of expensive people doing nothing. He did not think about consequences. He simply started walking. He crossed the polished floor without hurry, and the crowd parted more from confusion than respect, because a man in a maintenance uniform was not supposed to be walking toward Bradley Foster. He stopped an arm's length away, close enough to be heard far enough not to threaten. She already said no. Let go of her wrist. Every head nearby turned at once. Bradley laughed a short, surprised sound, as though a piece of the furniture had spoken. "Excuse me. Do you have any idea who I am? Go back to whatever wall you crawled out from?" The insult landed in the silence like a dropped plate, and still Grant did not move and did not look away. "I know exactly who you are," Grant said. "That's not the point." She said no, and no is a complete answer. You can let go of her now, or you can explain to every reporter in this room why you didn't. He kept his hands loose at his sides, offering no aggression and no retreat, and the stillness of him was somehow more forceful than anything louder would have been. Something in the exchange shifted the air. Bradley became aware all at once of the phones half-raised the reporters, no longer merely watching, but recording the 400 witnesses who a moment ago had been his shield and were now becoming his problem. His fingers opened. Olivia pulled her wrist back and stepped away, rubbing the reddened skin, and the whole confrontation had lasted less than a minute. "You've made a mistake tonight," Bradley said, low enough now that only the closest could hear, and the smile came back, like a door closing, a serious one. He straightened his jacket, lifted his champagne, and turned into the crowd as though he had chosen to walk away. But Grant had seen the look that crossed his face in the instant before he recovered it, and he recognized it as the look of a man who had just decided to destroy someone. The orchestra found its rhythm again, and conversations resumed in careful murmurs, everyone pretending to return to the evening, while their attention stayed fixed on the maintenance worker who had done what none of them had dared. Grant wanted none of it. He turned back toward the service door to finish the job. Olivia caught up to him before he reached it. "Wait," she said, and he stopped and turned. Up close, she was smaller than she had seemed at the center of the storm, and the composure she wore in public had thinned enough for her to show something real underneath it. "I don't know who you are, but you were the only person in that room who moved. I need to thank you for that." "You don't," he answered. "Anyone should have. Most people just don't." He shifted the tool bag on his shoulder in a way that told her without rudeness that he considered the matter finished. There was no angle in his face, no flicker of a man recognizing an opportunity. She had spent years learning to spot the exact moment a stranger realized who she was and began to calculate what she might be worth. She watched for it now, and did not find it. "You could at least tell me your name," she said. "The whole room saw what you did, and that won't just disappear, especially not for you. I'd like to know who I'm defending when Bradley starts telling his version of tonight. Grant Walker. I do maintenance for the hotel. And you don't need to defend me, Miss Sinclair. I said something true, and I meant it. That's the end of it as far as I'm concerned." He gave her a small nod, the kind a man gives when a conversation is over, and reached for the last of his tools. He genuinely believed the matter was closed. He was wrong, and she suspected it, even if he did not. "It's Olivia," she said to his back. He glanced over his shoulder, and for a moment something passed between them that neither had a name for not attraction, not yet, but the recognition of one honest thing in a room full of performances. Then he was gone through the service door, and she was left with the strange, unfamiliar sensation of having been protected by someone who wanted absolutely nothing from her in return. Bradley, near the bar, with 2 associates, was making calculations of a colder kind. He had been made small in front of 400 people who had spent years telling him he was large, and the man who had done it earned less in a year than Bradley spent in a single weekend. That imbalance was intolerable, and he had never in his life tolerated something he could instead crush. He was not a man who forgot. He was a man who arranged things. The maintenance worker had access to the hotel's technical systems obvious from the uniform and the tool bag, and it would take very little to make that access look sinister. A fabricated intrusion, a staged failure buried in the event's logs, a single convenient suspect with a name, a face, and no money to defend himself. And a second target was folded neatly inside the first. Olivia had let a nobody defend her in front of the entire industry and thanked him where people could see. That was a crack in the invulnerable image she had spent a decade building, and Bradley knew how to widen a crack until a wall came down. If he could brand her protector a criminal, he could brand her judgment a liability, a CEO who defended saboteurs, a leader too sentimental to run a company. The same directors who feared his money would begin to wonder whether Olivia Sinclair could still be trusted with theirs. Ruining the maintenance worker was revenge. Ruining Olivia was strategy. He intended to accomplish both from a single, well-designed lie. "Get me the name of the hotel's technical operations manager," he told the associate nearest him, "and find out who handles their security footage. I want a conversation before the night is over." Across the room, Olivia searched the faces near the service corridor without quite admitting what she was looking for. Grant had already gone. She told herself it did not matter that a maintenance worker she would likely never see again was not worth another moment of her attention on a night this important. She almost believed it. But the memory of 4 quiet words in a silent room stayed with her steady and warm, refusing to be filed away with everything else the evening had asked her to manage. She did not yet know that the night had set 2 very different things in motion, or that while she was learning for the first time in years that a man could be trusted, another man was already building the machine that would make that trust look like the worst mistake she had ever made. Grant drove home through empty streets with the radio off, feeling the same unease without understanding its source. He had done what he believed anyone should do, and he did not regret it. But he had seen Bradley Foster's face in the second, before the man recovered his mask, and 38 years of reading people had taught him what that expression meant. Somewhere behind him, in a bright ballroom full of powerful people, a decision had been made about his life without his consent. He only knew with a certainty that settled cold in his chest that the words he had spoken were not going to be free. The summons came 2 days after the gala, delivered not as a request, but as an order. Grant was pulled off his shift and walked to the hotel's security office, where 3 people waited around a laptop already open on the table. The head of security, a heavy-set man named Douglas Reyes, who had always been decent to him, would not quite meet his eyes, and that small avoidance told Grant more than anything said yet. There was an incident during the gala. Reyes began turning the laptop toward him. A technical intrusion into the event systems. Someone accessed the network from a maintenance terminal and triggered a cascade of failures in the lighting and audio grid. The logs point to your credentials, Grant, your access card, your terminal. The timestamps line up with the exact window you were on the floor. He said it flatly, like a man reading a sentence someone else had written. Grant looked at the screen and felt the floor tilt beneath him. The records were there in clean rows. His employee identification, the terminal he had used, a sequence of commands he had never entered, stamped with the minutes he had spent walking toward Bradley Foster. Every piece fit against him, with a precision no accident could produce. "I checked a lighting panel in the service corridor," he said carefully. "That's all I touched. I didn't go near the event network. Whoever built this record built it to point at me." The woman beside Reyes from the hotel's legal office spoke without warmth. "That's a serious accusation to make with no evidence, Mr. Walker. What we have is documented. What you have is a denial." She closed a folder. "There's significant pressure from one of the event's principal sponsors to treat this as criminal sabotage, and the hotel intends to cooperate fully." She did not name the sponsor. She did not have to. Grant understood then exactly what had happened. Bradley Foster had not shouted threats or thrown a punch. He had done something far more effective. He had reached into the machinery of the hotel and rewritten 2 days of history until an honest man became the only suspect in the room. And he had the money and the wounded pride to keep pushing until someone signed the papers that would end Grant's life as he knew it. "How long before this becomes a police matter?" Grant asked quietly. "That depends on people above all of us," Reyes said, and the regret in his voice was real even as he slid the suspension notice across the table. Grant read it once, folded it, and put it in his pocket. He did not argue, because no one in the room had the authority to help him, and arguing had never once changed the mind of a man who had already decided to be afraid. He walked out into a future that had narrowed to a single dark corridor. Olivia learned of the accusation the same afternoon, and every instinct she had trusted for 15 years told her the story was wrong. She had watched Grant Walker refuse to give her his name, and a man who wanted nothing did not sabotage a gala for the thrill of it. She recognized the fingerprints on the frame too, the timing too convenient, the evidence too complete. The pressure behind it aimed precisely at the one person who had embarrassed Bradley Foster in front of 400 witnesses. She did not announce her doubts. She simply began quietly to look. What she found reshaped the picture. Buried in an old professional record was a Grant Walker she had not met, an engineer of real standing who had once designed the safety and monitoring systems for some of the largest towers in the state, the kind of specialist hired to make sure a building's critical systems could not fail or be tampered with. He had walked away from all of it years ago and never once mentioned it, because mentioning it would have been a way of asking to be seen as more than the uniform. That more than his resume was what stayed with her. She arranged to meet him away from the hotel in a small office the company kept for private matters, and she laid what she had found on the table between them. "You built security systems for high-rises," she said. "You know exactly how the logs accusing you are supposed to work, and you're sitting in a maintenance uniform letting them bury you. Why didn't you say anything?" Grant looked at the printout of his own history, as though it belonged to someone he had known a long time ago. "Because that man made choices I couldn't live with, and because who I used to be doesn't change what I can prove today." He drew the laptop toward him, the one she had brought with copies of the incident logs, and his whole posture changed as he began to read. The weary caution left him, and something sharper took its place, the focus of a man returning to a language he had spoken fluently for years. "Give me 20 minutes with the raw data, not the summary they showed me, the raw system logs." She gave him the files, and within the 20 minutes, he had found what the frame had counted on, no one being able to see. "Here," he said, turning the screen toward her and pointing at a column of timestamps. "These entries were written after the fact. The sequence numbers don't increment the way a live system generates them. Someone injected these commands into the record and backdated them, but they didn't fix the internal counters because they didn't know the counters existed. This log has been edited. I can demonstrate it, but a board full of investors won't understand a counter. They'll believe whatever the summary tells them." Olivia leaned closer, and for the first time since the gala, she felt the ground firm up beneath her. "Then we find something they can't argue with," she said. Grant was quiet a moment thinking, and then he told her about the one thing that might save him. "When I designed systems like this, the standard I built to always included a separate recorder, an independent log that sits physically apart from the network, no cables to the outside, no remote access, air-gapped. It writes to itself, and nothing can reach it to change it because it isn't connected to anything that can be reached. If this building was fitted to that standard, there's a recorder in the secure technical room that holds the real sequence of that night, and it cannot have been touched." The significance landed on her at once. "So the true record still exists," she said. Grant nodded, but the hope in his face was measured. It exists if the building was built to spec, and I have every reason to believe it was. But I can't get to it. The air-gapped recorder lives inside the secure technical core, and a suspended maintenance worker doesn't have physical access to that room. Only executive-level authorization opens it. His eyes met hers, and the meaning sat plainly between them. He could find the truth. He could not reach it alone. For the first time, the man who wanted nothing needed something, and the only person who could give it to him was her. They kept working past midnight, and somewhere in the long quiet, the walls each of them carried came down a fraction. Grant, mapping the architecture of the system on a legal pad, spoke without looking up. I left the career because of one project. They wanted me to certify a building as safe that I knew wasn't to hit a deadline. I refused. They made it clear that refusing had a cost, and I paid it. And after my marriage ended, I decided I'd rather fix broken air conditioners and keep my word than build monuments and lose it. He set the pen down. People think walking away is weakness. It's the most expensive thing I ever did. Olivia listened, and something in her answered that she had not planned to give. For 15 years, every man who came toward me wanted the company, or the name, or the access, or the story of having been close to me. I stopped being able to tell the difference between someone who saw me and someone who saw an opportunity, so I stopped letting anyone close enough to matter. She looked at the diagram on his notepad rather than at his face. You didn't even want to give me your name. Do you understand how strange that was? I've been trying to figure out your angle for 3 days, and the answer is that you don't have one. He met her eyes then. I don't. That must be exhausting looking for it every time. In that small exchange, each recognized the same thing in the other two people who had paid a real price to keep hold of their integrity, and had grown so used to paying it alone that they had almost forgotten what it looked like on someone else. It was not romance yet. It was something more foundational, the first time in years either of them had felt genuinely understood. The understanding so newly built cracked the next afternoon over the one subject neither of them saw coming. Olivia arrived with what she believed was a gift. I've thought about this. The cleanest way through it is to make it disappear. I'll put my personal attorneys on it. I'll settle whatever needs settling, and I'll make sure the charges never reach a courtroom. And when it's over, I want to bring you into the company somewhere real, at a real salary to make up for what this has cost you. You never have to worry about money again. Let me handle it the way things get handled at this level. She expected relief. What she got was a stillness in Grant's face she did not immediately understand. So your solution is to buy the problem until it goes away, and then buy me along with it. The words were quiet, but they carried an edge she had not heard from him before. You want to pay off the truth and hand me a job as compensation. Do you hear how close that is to what he does? Bradley solves everything with money and leverage. He bought the people who forged those logs, and now you want to buy the people who'll pretend they never existed. From where I'm standing, that's the same world. The only difference is which one of you is signing the checks. The accusation struck her harder than Bradley's grip on her wrist had. That's not fair. I'm trying to protect you. Grant shook his head. You're trying to protect me the only way your world knows how, by making everything including me into something with a price. I don't want a payoff, and I don't want a rescue. I want the record to show what happened, and I want to clear my name, because it's mine. Not because someone with more money than my accuser decided I was worth saving. If we can't win this by being honest, then winning isn't worth anything to me. She sat with that after he left, and it changed her. She had spent her adult life in a world where every problem yielded to enough money and every person had a number, and she had never once considered that her fluency in that language might be a kind of poverty. Grant was not refusing her help out of pride. He was refusing to let her turn his integrity into a transaction because that integrity was the only thing the frame had not yet managed to take from him. When she found him again, she did not offer money. "You're right. We do it your way. We prove it. I'm not signing any checks. I'm opening a door." From that afternoon, she stopped treating him as a man to be compensated and started treating him as an equal to stand beside. Bradley, meanwhile, was tightening every loose thread with the thoroughness of a man who believed he had already won. He scrubbed the digital corners around the forged logs, arranging for stretches of hallway footage to be lost to a storage error, ensuring that 2 junior technicians, who might have vouched for Grant, suddenly remembered things differently after private conversations and generous consideration. He operated on a single confident assumption that would prove to be his undoing, that everything worth controlling lived on the network, and that anything on the network could be reached, rewritten, or erased by a man with enough money. He was not a technical person. He had never heard of an air-gapped recorder, and it never occurred to him that a record could exist somewhere his money could not touch. He moved against Olivia at the same time and more cleverly. In the careful phone calls that filled the hours between board members, he shaped a story about her. She had let a maintenance worker, now a suspected saboteur, humiliate a principal investor at her own gala, then publicly thanked him. Was that the judgment of a leader or of a woman ruled by sentiment? The seed took root exactly where he planted it, and the same directors who feared his capital began to wonder whether Olivia Sinclair had grown too emotional to be trusted with the company she had built. The pressure closed around both of them at once. Grant's suspension hardened into a formal notice of pending prosecution, and every remaining scrap of his system access was revoked, cutting him off from the very network he needed to prove his innocence. Olivia was cornered from the other side, forced by her own board into a choice she had been dreading: protect the company by distancing herself from Grant and letting the accusation run its course, or keep faith with a man the entire industry had already decided was guilty. Every advisor she trusted told her the safe answer was to let him fall. The board convened its emergency session in the long glass room at the top of the Sinclair Horizon Tower, and it went exactly as Bradley had engineered it to go. The forged logs were presented as fact, clean and damning, and no counter Grant could offer would mean anything to the men and women around that table. Bradley spoke with the wounded calm of a victim seeking justice, and by the time he finished, he had all but persuaded the shareholders to grant him expanded authority over the company's affairs and to require Olivia to step aside from her duties pending the outcome of the investigation. The one piece of evidence that could break it open, the air-gapped recorder, sat locked inside a secure room that neither Grant nor a CEO the board was now moving to suspend could command anyone to open. The door to the truth had swung shut. It was in that darkest hour that Grant did the thing Olivia would never forget. He came to her before the vote could be finished, and instead of asking her to fight for him, he asked her to let him go. "Cut yourself loose from me, publicly. Tell them you were misled, that you regret defending me, whatever it takes to save the company and your name. I'll take all of it, the charges, the record, the ruin. I have far less to lose than you do." He said it plainly, a man offering to walk into the fire alone so she would not be burned. And he asked for nothing in return, not even her belief in him. She looked at him and understood finally and completely what she was seeing. Here was a man at the very bottom with everything he valued about to be taken, and his last instinct was to shield her at his own total expense. There was no angle in it. There could not be. He had nothing left to gain. In 15 years, no one had ever put her above their own survival, and this man, whom she had known for barely a week, was trying to do exactly that in the moment it cost him most. Something in her that had been closed for a very long time came open and did not close again. "No," she said, and the word was steady and final. "I'm not letting you take this alone. We're going to walk into that room together, and we're going to win." The board reconvened the next morning, the final vote on Olivia's suspension deliberately held over from the night before, and she did not walk in as a woman on the defensive. She walked in as a woman who had spent the entire night deciding to stop playing defense at all. Because Bradley had insisted the matter be settled in full view of the industry, a row of reporters sat along the far wall of the glass-walled conference room. He wanted an audience for his victory. She intended to give him one, though not for the reason he believed. She had understood something in the sleepless hours before dawn, and it had nothing to do with logs or lawyers. She understood Bradley Foster. 15 years of reading the exact angle at which a man held his drink had taught her precisely how his kind failed. And Bradley's weakness was not one he could hide, because it was the very engine that drove him. He needed to win in public. He needed to be seen defeating the people who had embarrassed him. A quiet victory would never satisfy him, and that hunger to humiliate her and Grant in front of a room was the loose thread she meant to pull until the whole thing came apart. So she did not fight the framing when the session opened. She let the forged logs be presented again. Let the council describe the sabotage as settled fact. Let Bradley speak of his wounded confidence in the company's leadership. And when the moment came for her to defend herself, she did the one thing no one expected. She appeared to surrender. "You're right," she told the board, her voice calm and almost tired. "The evidence deserves to be tested properly in front of everyone, so there can be no doubt left. I think we should reconstruct exactly what happened that night on the live system, in this building right now." Bradley's satisfaction was immediate and visible. "Finally," he said, spreading his hands to the directors as though her words had proven his patience justified. "A reconstruction. Let's put the accusation on the screen and end this." He was so eager to watch Grant destroyed in real time, so certain the record he had built would hold, that he never once asked why the woman he was trying to ruin would volunteer to speed things along. His need to win in front of the cameras had already begun to close the trap around him, and he walked deeper into it with every confident word. "A reconstruction of that scale touches the core event systems," Olivia went on, addressing the board rather than Bradley. "It requires opening the secure technical room, and by the company's own protocols, only executive authorization can do that." She let the sentence settle, then turned it with the precision of a key. "I'm still the chief executive of this company until you vote otherwise, and I'm authorizing it. If Mr. Foster is as confident in his evidence as he claims, he'll want that room opened as much as I do." Bradley, blind to everything but the prospect of his triumph, nodded his agreement in front of every reporter present. He had just consented to the one action that would undo him. Grant was brought in as the only person present with the skill to run the reconstruction, and the irony was not lost on anyone. The accused would operate the very system meant to condemn him. He said nothing as he was escorted to the terminal. As the heavy door was unlocked on Olivia's authority, the door a suspended maintenance worker could never have opened alone. He felt the pieces of his defense finally align. Her power had reached the place his skill could not. Neither of them could have done this without the other. Inside the secure room, the reconstruction began under the eyes of the board, the reporters, and Bradley himself, who had followed to savor the finish. Grant brought the network logs up on the main display, the same forged sequence used to accuse him, and walked the room through the timeline Bradley had built. "This is the record as it currently exists on the network. According to this, my credentials issued a series of commands during the gala that brought down the event systems." Bradley smiled at the directors. The story was playing exactly as he had written it. But every system built to this safety standard. Grant continued moving to a smaller, older console, set into the wall of the secure core, keeps a second record, an independent recorder that never touches the network, no cables to the outside, no remote access. It writes only to itself, which means no one, no matter how much money they spend or who they pay can reach it to change what it saw. He entered a command, and a new sequence began to populate the screen beside the first. This is the true log. It has never been connected to anything that could alter it, and it does not match. The color left Bradley's face by slow degrees as the two records unspooled side by side. The forged network log and the untouched air-gapped record diverged at the critical minutes, and the difference was not subtle. The independent recorder showed that during the exact window Grant had supposedly triggered the sabotage, his credentials had been idle, while a different set of login information routed to make the intrusion appear to come from his terminal had done the actual work. It was information Bradley believed erased with everything else because he had scrubbed the network clean and never imagined a record living somewhere his money could not reach. "You edited the log that was connected to the world," Grant said, turning from the screen to the man who had tried to end his life over 4 words at a gala. "You were thorough. You bought the footage, the witnesses, the timestamps. But you're not a technical man, Mr. Foster, so you didn't know this recorder existed, and you couldn't have reached it if you had. The room you were so eager to open to destroy me is the room that just cleared my name." Sant. The stage Bradley had demanded for his own triumph had become the place he exposed himself in front of every reporter he had personally invited to watch. Bradley's composure broke into something ugly and desperate. "This is fabricated," he snapped, pointing at the second screen. "He's an engineer. He built that record himself right now to save his own skin." But the accusation collapsed the instant he made it because the whole room could see that the air-gapped console was a fixed installation, sealed into the wall, its records time-stamped continuously since long before the gala, and impossible to backfill without the very network access Grant no longer had. His own insistence on a public reconstruction had guaranteed there was no private corner left to retreat into. The reporters were already typing. That was the moment Olivia had built the entire trap to reach, and she did not let it pass. She rose from her seat at the head of the table, and she did not do it as a woman who had just been rescued. She did it as the chief executive of Sinclair Horizon, delivering the blow herself. "Everyone in this room has now seen 2 records," she said, her voice carrying to the reporters along the wall. "One that Mr. Foster manufactured, and one that no amount of his money could touch. I think we all understand which one is real." She turned to the board with the full weight of her authority behind her. "Bradley Foster fabricated evidence of a crime, purchased silence from employees of this hotel, destroyed footage, and attempted to seize expanded control of this company on the strength of a lie. He did it to punish a man for the offense of telling him no on my behalf, and he did it to remove me by making my judgment look like a weakness." Her eyes moved across the directors who only a day earlier had been ready to set her aside. "I am the chief executive of this company, and I am formally moving to strip Bradley Foster of every position, share privilege and authority he holds within it, effective immediately pending criminal referral." The vote did not take long. The same directors who had feared Bradley's capital an hour earlier now feared being photographed on the wrong side of him, and the reporters made certain there would be photographs. Bradley Foster was stripped of his standing in the company before he left the building, and the fabricated evidence meant to imprison Grant became instead the documentation of Bradley's own crimes. He was escorted out under the gaze of the same industry he had tried to weaponize, and the investigation that opened against him for falsifying evidence and corporate manipulation would follow him in for years. The man who had built his life on the belief that money could rewrite any truth had been undone by the one record his money could not reach. Grant stood in the quiet that followed with the strange lightness of a man who has set down a weight he carried so long he forgot its shape. His name was clean. The record showed what had actually happened, restored not by a payoff or a rescue, but by the truth exactly as he had insisted it must be. He caught Olivia's eye across the room, and in the small exchange between them was an acknowledgement neither needed to voice. They had walked into that room together as she had promised, and they had won the only way that would have meant anything to him. In the days that followed, the story moved through the industry and settled, and Olivia held her position as chief executive more firmly than before, her judgment vindicated in the most public way imaginable. But the victory that mattered to her was quieter. She had spent 15 years unable to tell the difference between a man who saw her and a man who saw an opportunity, and somewhere in the wreckage of the last 2 weeks, she had finally learned that the thing she had been searching for was never wealth or power or ambition. It was the far rarer thing Grant had shown her without ever trying, to a person who would respect her as a human being and stand beside her expecting nothing in return. She found him a week later, not with an offer wrapped in money, because she had learned exactly how much that would cost her, but with something she had thought carefully about. "I want to create a position, Director of Systems Safety, overseeing the integrity of every building and network this company touches. It's real work, and you're the most qualified person I've ever met to do it." She held his gaze steadily. "And it comes with one condition that isn't negotiable: the job stays balanced. It never becomes the kind of thing that eats a person's life. You keep what matters to you outside of it. That's the whole point of building it around you instead of around the work." Grant considered the offer for a long moment, weighing it not against the salary, but against the thing he had walked away from his old career to protect. He had left an industry that asked him to trade his integrity for a deadline, and he had spent years fixing broken things in a faded uniform rather than build another monument on a compromised foundation. What Olivia was offering was different in the one way that mattered. "You're not asking me to certify something I don't believe. You're asking me to make sure things are actually safe, and you're building it so the work serves the life instead of swallowing it." He extended his hand. "That I can do." They shook on it, and the handshake carried none of the transactional weight that had defined every deal she had ever made in that tower. It was instead the beginning of something built on the only foundation either of them had ever fully trusted: the plain fact that neither wanted anything from the other except the truth. She had opened a door, and he had walked through it on his own terms, and somewhere in the exchange, the last of the distance between the CEO and the man in the maintenance uniform quietly dissolved. What grew between them after that grew slowly, the way real things do. There was no sudden declaration, no romance manufactured from the drama they had survived, only the ordinary hours that follow a storm, the working late that no longer felt like war, the conversations that no longer circled an emergency, the gradual discovery of two people who had each paid to keep their integrity and almost forgotten what it felt like to be understood by someone who had paid the same price. Trust came first because for both of them, it had always been the hardest currency to earn. Everything gentler followed from it. Olivia understood in the end exactly what had changed her. For 15 years, she had been chased by men who wanted the empire behind her smile, and she had built her walls high enough to keep every one of them out. It had taken a man in a faded uniform who did not know who she was and did not care to remind her that she was worth defending for reasons that had nothing to do with any of it. He had crossed a marble floor in a silent ballroom to say 4 words that no one else in that room had the courage to say, and he had asked for nothing. And in asking for nothing, he had given her the one thing all their money never could. She thought about that first night. Often the grip on her wrist, the ring of powerful people who had watched and done nothing, and the quiet figure who had stepped out of the crowd and refused to let a wrong go unanswered. Everything that mattered in her life now traced back to that single moment and the plain, unpurchasable courage behind it. The man who had defended her had had nothing to gain and everything to lose, and he had done it anyway, because to him, It was simply the right thing to do. The truth she carried out of all of it was the simplest one she had ever learned, and the most expensive to arrive at. The worth of a person was never in what they owned or the position they held. It was in the courage to stand up for what was right when standing up cost something, and in the respect they extended to another human being when there was no profit in it. Wealth had surrounded her all her life and left her alone inside it. It was ordinary, unbought kindness, the kind that expected nothing back, that had finally proven to be ground solid enough to build a life on. And it had come to her when she least expected it, in the form of a poor single father who had looked an arrogant man in the eye and said only, "She already said no."